A privately funded plan to build a cross-border pipeline from Alberta to major U.S. refineries was rejected outright by Ottawa, and within hours, Alberta vowed to respond. This is not just a dispute about infrastructure. It's a clash over who controls Canada's economic future, with constitutional and economic consequences that could reshape federal-provincial relations. Here's what happened. Investors were ready to commit $8 to $10 billion to a pipeline that would move Alberta crude directly into the U.S. Midwest and Gulf Coast. The proposal promised private financing, no federal subsidies, and quicker market access for Alberta producers. Rather than extended consultations with affected provinces, the federal government dismissed the plan on climate grounds. The decision landed like a shockwave in Edmonton. Alberta's response was immediate. Premier Danielle Smith stood before the cameras to say the province would not accept being blocked by Ottawa. She announced a task force to explore legal, economic, and constitutional options and promised provincial corridors, expanded rail and port capacity, and new trade routes. Saskatchewan quickly signed on. Ontario signaled support, and Western premiers began coordinating. What began as a single project is now rallying provinces around a narrative of autonomy and economic self-determination. Why this matters is simple. Market access is lifeblood for Alberta's economy. Billions in potential revenue, tens of thousands of jobs, and long industrial value chains depend on pipelines and reliable export routes. When access is restricted, investment stalls, workers lose hours or jobs, and communities that depend on energy activity feel the pain through lower municipal revenues, fewer school and hospital resources, and slower local growth. For many Albertans, the federal decision is not abstract politics, it is daily hardship. There is also an international dimension. U.S. refiners and state officials who had planned for these supplies were blindsided. In Washington and state capitals, industry voices and some policymakers cautioned that Canada had become an unreliable partner when politics outweighed long-term commercial arrangements. When buyers lose confidence, trade flows can shift permanently to other suppliers, and that means lost markets for Alberta, even if a later agreement is reached. The political fallout at home is intense. Critics accuse the federal government of treating Alberta's energy sector as a bargaining chip in pursuit of global climate credibility. Opposition parties and regional politicians argue Ottawa is prioritizing optics over workers. That narrative fuels anger and gives new momentum to debates over provincial autonomy, the use of sovereignty tools, and independence talk in increasingly vocal circles. Alberta's options fall into several tracks, each with risks and trade-offs. Legal challenges could target procedural flaws, lack of consultation, or perceived overreach, but courts move slowly and won't immediately restore market access. Infrastructure workarounds, investing in rail capacity, port terminals, or alternative coastal routes can mitigate bottlenecks, but require time, capital, and cooperation from other jurisdictions. Interprovincial alliances can pool political and financial resources, but coordination across multiple governments is complex and costly. This dispute also forces a broader question. How does a federation reconcile national climate commitments with regional economic survival? Ottawa frames its rejection as consistent with international obligations and a national vision for emissions reduction. Alberta frames it as an economic veto that ignores local livelihoods and technological advancements in emissions management. Neither side is entirely wrong, but neither has yet found a convincing framework that balances climate leadership with practical and immediate market access for resource-dependent regions. Public trust is fragile. If provinces feel ignored, and if business actors conclude federal approvals are unpredictable, investment will flow elsewhere. Conversely, if the federal government is perceived as capitulating to every provincial demand, its climate leadership credibility could erode. The coming weeks will test whether both sides step back from maximal positions to negotiate a path that protects jobs and markets while genuinely advancing environmental commitments. What to watch next: legal filings from Alberta and industry, the task force's findings and recommended actions, and any concrete infrastructure investments such as new rail lines or port improvements. Also watch interprovincial alliances. If provinces formalize a cooperative corridor strategy, that could permanently change how energy gets to market in Canada. Finally, watch diplomatic signals from the U.S. Sustained American concern could create pressure on Ottawa to reconsider or at least open a mediated dialogue. Behind the headlines are real families and small businesses. Towns that rely on drilling, transport, and refinery work face immediate uncertainty. Contractors, restaurateurs, and service providers see contracts vanish while municipal revenues shrink. Economists warn that lost export opportunities shift tax bases, which can force spending cuts or higher local taxes and reduce funding for schools and hospitals. Investors demand regulatory predictability. When approvals appear unpredictable, capital moves elsewhere. Politically, prolonged conflict hardens positions, raises the cost of compromise, and makes national cooperation on climate and economic policy much harder to achieve. It slows national growth prospects. The bottom line is urgent and clear. This is not a single pipeline canceled and forgotten. It is a stress test of Canadian federalism, of how economic rights and environmental responsibilities are reconciled, and of whether provinces and Ottawa can rebuild trust after a bruising decision. Alberta's immediate aim is market access and jobs. Ottawa's priority is meeting climate commitments and honoring international partners. The only viable long-term solution will require transparent processes, meaningful consultation, and a political willingness to reconcile competing regional and national priorities.